Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hi, everyone. It's the Mimi and Greg Show. In this episode, Greg, Rucka, and I discuss his Atticus Kodiak novels. How lucky am I to be in a book club with the author of the books? We brought in another Rucka fan, my husband Oscar Agramonte, to join us as we talk all things Atticus Kodiak. Thank you to all the fans who sent in listener questions. We didn't get to all of them, but we will try to ask them in a future episode. I promise. For those that don't already know, Greg Rucka is a New York Times best-selling author of hundreds of comics and nearly 24 novels. He is also the writer for the hit film The Old Guard, starring Charlize Theron. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/sifumimichan. For comments or suggestions, email me at mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or reach out on social media at sifumimichan. Now, on with the show. Hello. It's Greg and Oscar today.
Hey.
I'm so honored. I'm just going to stay in the back. I'm going to stay in the background.
Did you get a written invitation?
Yeah, Evite.
One of those animated cards, maybe?
E-cards. Do people still do e-cards?
Oh, yeah. I get them occasionally.
My mom always sends us e-cards for like our birthdays and anniversaries, but I don't get them from anybody else.
Yeah. They're not as common as once were. Evites are still pretty common, though.
Yeah, Evite's still pretty common.
Though there are less and less reasons to send them out.
Well, I did just notice because I did just send an Evite. This is so weird because I normally don't, but they have virtual like to do virtual parties now, so like you could still Evite for that. So they've quickly pivoted in the world of e-invitations.
Adapted. So I can't tell how bad the connection is today. It seems like we're getting some buzz out.
Yeah, it's a little bit funny, but let's see what happens with the internets. Otherwise, we'll just vote Oscar off the island, and we'll make him come into this room.
Just make it how you normally make it, and then this is what's making it lag.
Well, we had Oscar join us today because he is a fan of the books. And of course, listeners know that we have been ramping up to this for a couple of months now of the Atticus Kodiak
series. You guys
series.
all had time to read these things. And if you didn't, it's on you.
That's right. But since there are a plethora of novels to go through, we kind of focused in from Critical Space, Patriot Acts, and Walking Dead.
Yeah.
And being that Walking Dead has very sensitive material for me, Oscar read it. Not only did he read it, he enjoyed it. I'll let him tell you about that. But I thought he would bring some value to the conversation since he actually read that book.
Okay.
I'll save my comments.
All right. Well, until we get there. All right.
So for our listeners, obviously, it's still the Mimi and Greg show. So hang on, because I'm sure we'll get there. But we are definitely going to talk about Atticus Kodiak.
I don't know. We could probably spend the hour talking about the books if you wanted, which might be a somewhat refreshing change from the shrieking into the ether that this is
absolutely
sometimes turns into.
Never, ever. So, just to get it out of the way, obviously I always enjoy your writing. And so it's kind of goes without saying that I enjoyed the books, even though like this is not my normal genre. Like my novel reading is generally YA, kind of romance or dystopian future, which I'm doing less of now because it's too real. But then, that's kind of my genre. Whereas this is like Oscar's wheelhouse. Like these are his type of books. So he immediately said, oh, well, you need to read along with us. So.
Okay. That seems fair. Yeah. I always describe these books as men with guns chasing other men with guns. and occasionally women with guns chasing men with guns. That is its own genre, in my opinion. So
Very, very well
There's a
described.
difference though, and it's that there's always an underlying theme of the woman being the badass in most of these books.
yeah, but that's just me.
Right. That's what I'm saying. That's the difference.
But that's
the
what he means. The difference between your men chasing men with guns and other men with chasing men books with is that you have like a very underlying strong female character always in there, which is probably why I appreciated it.
Well, I mean, yeah, when we talk about Elena, she is in the calculus of that equation the highest factor. You don't mess with her. She is trouble. And I guess on the badass scale of, Greg's characters who are not in some way scientifically or chemically modified, she wins hands down. I
would say so, being that I've read most of your work. So.
Yeah, no. So as far as normal mortals go, there's a Andrew Vox line from one of the early Burke novels that describes a character. It's been so long since I read them, I can't remember the name of the character, but the line used to describe him is, you go to mess with him, you best bring your own body bag. And I always thought that was a lovely description of the danger of a human being. It was like, this, if you're gonna mess with this guy, make your arrangements in advance. So.
Very fitting, very fitting. Yes, Elena does definitely portray all sorts of badassery. And so you had recommended, of course, to me, like Critical Space particularly. And after reading it, there's several factors that I'm going to guess is why. Like one is I felt really strongly about, like, that one was my favorite. I only read the 2 out of the 3, but that one was definitely my favorite. And one of our other readers
Patriot Acts is weaker. It is the weakest of the 3, in my opinion. And there are a variety of reasons for that, and we can get into it when we get into it in detail. Mm-hmm. Critical is an interesting book, and I think there are a lot of people who have read my novels who think it's the best one. I actually think Walking Dead is better, just in the Kodiak series. I think Walking Dead is a more accomplished novel, but I think Critical's, to blow my own horn, I wrote a good book. So
you sure did. I have somebody else in the room with us here that definitely would be on the Walking Dead vote side, because he came running into the room upon reading this book while I was, whatever it was I was doing to tell me about it.
Well, I mean, Walking is very much the finale, so it benefits from everything that comes before. It actually benefits all the way going back to Keeper. I mean, it is the end of. It is an appropriate end for the series if that is the end of the series.
Ooh, I love that you just said if.
I've got notes for a new one that I have been sort of looking at askance for the last year and a half, and I may well write it someday. I don't know. Mm-hmm. We will see.
Yeah. Well, of course, that already takes us into a listener question, which Ian was asking, is there movement on the 9th book? Because he loves our talks. He loves everything about the Kodiak series. And that was, of course, a couple listeners had actually asked about that. And that's always a question that's like, what's next? But we do know that from previous episodes, it takes a lot out of you to do these novels.
Yeah, I mean,
you do have a lot on your plate.
Well, and novels are hard for me. And have gotten much harder the older I've gotten. And I think, like I said, the last one I did, came out the week my dad died. And that experience around Bravo was so negative. It's been very, very difficult to commit to doing long form prose. I suppose there are healthier ways for me to go about writing it, should I decide to do it, than the way I used to. Because it used to be, if I was writing a novel, that was all I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that became more and more difficult if there were other things going on, like you had to write these scripts for comics and this stuff was happening. And I've talked before about that. For me, it's a very isolating process.
Mm-hmm.
And that said, there is, I've got notes for a Kodiak novel that is effectively a decade later.
Okay.
This is what it looks like 10, 12 years after Walking Dead.
Are they training the little one?
No, Nat is, here's the hypothetical novel. Nat,
Take notes.
Nat's 11, she's roughly 11 in that book, and she has no reason to believe that her parents are anything but what they are. It's Tiasa who is a little murder machine waiting to happen, because, she's now 24, and in the course of the novel, fairly early on, it would be revealed that the conversation that Tiasa has with them, about 6 months after Natalia is born, saying, "So I know what you did to get me back. Explain," and Atticus and Elena having a fairly vigorous argument about how to engage that, and Tiasa basically saying, "No, you don't understand. I need that knowledge. I need to be sure that it will not happen to me again." And so for Elena and Tiasa, it's very much one-on-one therapy, because one of the thematic things about this hypothetical next Kodiak is that it's about cycles of violence and surviving abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's one of the things thematically that's going on. And Elena is an abuse survivor, and we know Tiasa is an abuse survivor. And so the idea is that, they teach her. They like, okay, and this is why you're going to learn how to dance, and this is how you're going to learn how to fight, and these are the things you need to know. And this is how you learn to use these weapons, and this is how you learn to connect with your fake IDs, and so on and so on. And she has all that knowledge, and she said, okay, great. And is empowered by what she knows, and goes off to live her life, so that when the novel starts, Tiasa, and this is the concept for the novel, is that the novel's actually told in 3 POVs that rotate. You're in Atticus's, you're in Elena's, and you're in Tiasa's.
Mm.
And so when you encounter Tiasa, she's, working as she's scraping out a living as a professional, dancer in Toronto. And meanwhile, Atticus and Elena and Nat are living, in British Columbia. And then, of course, the novel starts with somebody from Elena's past having tracked her down, and Atticus and Elena literally looking at the day that they always feared was going to coming to pass. And so Elena is effectively blackmailed into a job. And the threat is, of course, to her family and everybody she cares about. So Atticus has to take Nat and go to ground. So they've got to run. And the spoiler in the story that the bad guys don't know about is Tiasa, because you called Tiasa. Now she's got all the knowledge, but she's never put it into practice. But you tell her that somebody is threatening her family, and going back to if Elena is the top, well, Elena's in her late 40s. She's slowing down a bit.
Yeah, I can understand that one.
but Tiasa's, 24.
Right.
So she's pretty much at the height of her physical game. So
I
yeah.
love
This is
it.
a
Well,
great story.
I'm hooked. I'm hooked. I mean,
Yeah.
I can see you haven't thought about it at all, so.
Yeah, it's not that I don't know what the book is. It's that I don't know if I can write it.
Yeah.
We're 20 minutes in, and we're going to talk about these 3 books, and I'm telling you about a 4th one I haven't written, and maybe won't. But yeah,
this is the best book club ever.
Yeah, this is great. I'm good.
That's the premise for it, and
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's going to hold our listeners over, but also hold them to constantly badger you until you write it now, since you've given us this taste, right? So,
well,
but
there was an interesting narrative thing. This does actually go back to the to Critical and Patriot and Walking, which is there was an interesting narrative thing that started to develop in Critical, where Atticus, prior to Critical Space, had been so, and I've talked about this before, when you write in first person, there's a fundamental conceit that the author has to engage. And that is, if it's a first person narrative, that means that the character who is saying, I did this and I did that, wrote the book you are reading. Right? That's the implicit agreement. If you pick up a book and it says by Greg Rucka, but there's a guy named Atticus talking to you, it's Atticus who's written this down. Mm-hmm. And this begs certain questions. Why? When? How do you get it published? How did it come to you? These things like that. But in Critical, one of the things that happened was I embraced Atticus working with the voice a little more, so that you have, for instance, in the second part, the chapter 3 or chapter 4 of part 2, in Bequia, where Atticus says, so this is what happens, and proceeds to describe what Elena does to him, and then says, these are the results, right? And proceeds to describe those things. That's very directly to the reader. He's saying, if you do these things in these ways, your body reacts like this. Right. And these are the techniques, and these are the results. And in 6 weeks, you will look at yourself in a mirror and go, holy Christ, that's not me. And you get it in Patriot as well. It's not as well done, and it's not you, but it is the first person narration pulls out and becomes a third person when he's describing, for instance, how Elena gets from Wyoming to North Carolina. And then that becomes much more honed in Walking Dead, when Atticus has to describe what happened back in Cobuletti while he was away. And that sequence in Walking Dead, I actually think is the most accomplished of those. Like you get the benefit of a first person narrative written about she did this, she did that, and then it'll drop into these parentheticals. Like there's a bit in that where she apparently misses 2 shots.
I knew you were going to say that. I was thinking the exact same thing. And he kind of raises his eyebrows.
Yeah, and she gets indignant. She's like,
yeah. I was like shot, and what
do you want from me?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm allowed to miss,
Yeah.
But him being like, oh, you actually missed? I'm shocked.
Yeah.
Yeah, Oscar just mentioned that part to me like yesterday, I think, when we were talking about this.
Well, and it's a neat narrative shuck and jive, right? It's a neat sort of feint because it keeps it within this first person. But within that third person, it then has to explain how Atticus comes by that knowledge. So in, for instance, Walking Dead, it is framed afterwards by Elena has told him all this when they meet up again in Odessa. And the Atticus narrative resumes pretty much after the conclusion of the Elena narrative that brings her to that point. So.
Yeah, I like that part a lot because you also like wondering the entire time, what the hell is happening with Elena? Why hasn't she made contact? Well,
yeah,
and
it's
so
scary, doesn't it?
yeah, and you're just thinking, shit, man, I just hope nothing happens to her.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's interesting. You know, there were readers at the start of the series who Bridget was very polarizing for a lot of.
I read the first book, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
that's how I felt about Bridget.
Yeah.
1996, but still with a lot of important themes.
Yeah, so this
sadly
is one
relevant.
Of the things, yeah, you're always relevant. That's the problem. You always bring up the stuff.
Yeah.
Way to bring it up. But this is actually one of the things, because you had mentioned, hey, we'll just start at Critical Space and go through there. And while I really enjoyed it, one of the things, like Oscar, who like is kind of used to reading these type of genre, like I really felt like I could just, it was like a standalone. And then at the end of it, I was like, and then so I felt like it could have used an epilogue. I was like, Oscar's like, no, the books are, and then you read the next book.
Yeah, it goes, and then you read the next one.
Right. But then what Oscar had mentioned, and maybe you could pick it up, is explaining how he really wanted to know more of the characters, because he knew from reading other types of series, like you feel these connections to, okay, well, him and Bridget have more than what's just here, and even drama. Maybe you could go for that question, Oscar.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, Oscar.
No, I mean, my thing was Mimi hasn't read books like this. She usually reads like a trilogy of a young adult novel from beginning to end. And Critical Space, I said, it was a great book, but if we had read the first books, then the way that Greg wrote the interactions with everyone, it would be a lot more meaningful for us. So, you know, you're picking up and you're like, yeah, it's entertaining. It's good. But we don't have the context of like the history.
Like when Scott is off, like I was upset, but Oscar's like, he was in book 1. I was like, oh my God, gone 4 more books with him. It would have been horrible. It would be even more horrifying.
Yeah, he was there the whole time. Yeah, I mean, it is the nature of the series, and I never wanted to write a series that was going to be, you know, traditional sitcom, which was going to be, and at the end of each book you reset. At the beginning. I wanted an evolution, and I thought it was very important that certainly Atticus grow. But, you know, he meets Bridget in the first book, and they are stormy from the start. And, you know, and then if you read Smoker, right, which is the book that introduces the concept of the 10 and introduces drama.
Okay, so that's where she comes in, because Oscar was wondering, and he's like, I want to know more about drama. He's like, I want to know.
I had to go back, so I only, before today, I only got to the first book. So I still have the next to I was like, I have to find out. I have to find out everything.
Because a big question is like why she chose Atticus to protect her, but maybe because we're missing context.
Well, kind of. I mean, she gives the answer in Critical, but. You know, Smoker is the book that explains it, or, you know, is the story of that.
Okay.
And you know, Keeper is very early Atticus. Finder is Atticus really in a dark place, introduces Erica, gives some more of his backstory, reveals some more about Atticus's failings. But you get into Smoker, and when Smoker starts, he is pretty much unable to get a job, and Trent hires him, unbeknownst to Atticus, to sort of bird dog because he's got a client that he believes one of the 10 is after. And that opens up the whole of the 10. And at that time, the only identification they have for the assassin they think is coming after Trent's principal is John Doe. They literally have nothing on this person, just nothing at all. I mean, you know, all the others, they're like, we think he's kind of kinky, so we're going to call him the bondage guy, you know, or this guy sets fire to people, we're going to call him the arsonist, right? You know, and this one seems to get people in sexual relationships. So we have reason to believe she's female, so we're calling her Lilith, right? And John Doe, they're just like, we think there's an assassin out there who is doing some of these. We don't know. So literally they're like, this could be coming from anywhere. And what happens over the course of Smoker is that Elena presents herself to Atticus as effectively the leg person for John Doe. And when she encounters Atticus, she does so wearing a comedy tragedy mask. So that's how you get the name Drama.
Mm-hmm.
And as Atticus says in Critical Space, his suspicion is that he just got lucky on timing, and that the only reason that he was still alive was because she had been bugging his apartment when he came back. And so she flipped it on him because she needed him alive, because if he's not alive, he's not a source of information. She's not after him. She's after the target. And by the end of the novel, Atticus is concluded you are John Doe, right? This is just another layer of insulation. But Elena says in Critical, the end of Smoker is quite literally Atticus, Dale, and their principal in one room, and Elena on the other side of the door. And she has already made an attempt on this guy, and they have a conversation through the door that's this really brief conversation where she's like, look, I don't want to have to kill you to do it. I'll do it. And Atticus is like, all of New York law enforcement is descending on this location at this moment. So you've got to make a choice. You can come in here and you can do your job. You will complete your contract. No doubt about it. Right. But you're going to die if you do that. They're going to get you. And that's when Elena, there's a beat there, and she says, she has a line, and that's where she references Beckwith and pineapple muffins. And then she basically puts an explosive on the door. And Atticus and Dale and Pugh, the principal, go for cover, and they survive. And she's gone. So in Critical, when she talks about why her arguments are twofold. Right. The first is I didn't want to die. Right. I should have done what you said I needed to do. I should have come through the door. I didn't do that. Now, why I didn't do that, I am still unpacking. But if it comes out to the fact that I want to live, then that's a new thing for me, because normally surviving is a different thing than living. The second is, I gave you the chance to walk away and you didn't. And Pugh was not a great human being. And you were willing to put yourself between him and me, even when you could have walked away. And you had no reason to believe you would live. None. Hi, I kill people professionally, and I think somebody's trying to kill me. I'd like you to protect me. Kind of a check in the resume there for you. So yeah.
And so I think also picking up in Critical, it ends where, like I said, I was so like, oh my gosh, what happens next? Because obviously she, in a sense, one of the things Oscar and I in our book club we talked about was like, did she therefore save him from turning into XYZ, or like from being that killer and making that decision? And then, one of your listener questions, I think two people, I can't even read the name on this one. I'm not going to try. And Bill, Bospius and Bill, they all wondered the same thing, but basically Atticus's evolution from bodyguard to where he is beyond that in the final novels. But yet he still kind of does hold on to that principle that he has. Like Oscar mentioned in Walking Dead, you said, well, he doesn't
He should have killed two people, but I guess he's too good.
That's still part of him, right?
Oh yeah, no.
Because he was never an assassin.
He's too good. Like he's Atticus,
Yeah, no, the end of Walking Dead is a problem Atticus has created himself.
Yes.
He should have dropped those two bodies.
Right.
And Elena would have looked at him and said, "You should have dropped those two bodies."
Right.
I mean, there was no reason to leave those people alive other than something in you that did not want to kill them when they were helpless. Right? You couldn't do that in that moment. There is, so, we've talked about my love of the private eye genre, and Atticus comes out of the private eye genre. And when I was creating Atticus, I was young and, very, very certain about certain things. And one of the things I was very certain about was Raymond Chandler's The Simple Art of Murder, which is an essay that Chandler wrote about detective fiction. And it gets quoted all the time. The quote from it you normally hear is the line, "But down these mean streets, a man must go who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid." And what Chandler is describing is the protagonist for these kinds of stories. He's like that he has to be the best man in his world and a good enough man for any world, right? And I always thought, aside from that being a beautiful, beautiful phrase, that to me was a rule, that Atticus has to be the best man in his world and a good enough man for any world. And when the series starts, the world he is in is the world of protection. So he has to be the best man in that world. Critical Space is in large part about the changing of the world. He goes from protection to the flip of it, which is assassination. So he has to be the best man in that world, which creates a whole new set of problems. Because the best man in that world is not, in a million years, going to be the best man in the previous world. Can't be. They're mutually exclusive. So a lot of what you get in the remainder of Critical and throughout Patriot and in Walking is him trying to grapple with how to, and he doesn't think about it. Atticus would never think about it as, I need to be the best man in my world. That's never how he thinks about it, but he is going to think about it in terms of being somebody he can look at in the mirror. And that is why, he leaves these guys alive, because, each of them, when he has them, they are helpless, right? They are entirely in his power. He can kill them.
And he's killed a lot already in that book.
Yeah. Oh my God. The body count in Walking Dead is ridiculous, but that's because the people that he's dealing with are just horrible. Yeah. There's a funny bit in Walking Dead where he goes into the brothel outside of Dubai in the desert. And I remember approaching that scene and being like, oh, how is he going to get through the, it was one of those ones where I saw it spinning out in front of me. I was like, this is going to be a 10,000 word sequence of how he tries to clever his way in and out of it. And then I was like, oh, no, fuck it. No, he's just gonna have the moment literally in the doorway where he goes, yeah, I guess I got to do this hard and fast.
I love that scene. And I love the when you went through the tactical of, okay, what if someone's on the stairs? Obviously, I don't even know how to shoot a gun or anything, but I'm just like, this is so cool. I'm like in my mind taking notes if I'm ever in that situation, right? You don't want to be coming down the stairs.
Yeah, fatal funnel, man. The stairs are the worst in the world. For a long time on these books, and you'll see in the acknowledgments, there's a guy named Jerry Hennelly, who at this point I've known for over 2 decades, who is sort of my technical advisor. And Jerry worked in personal protection. He's been in law enforcement. He's been in the military. He's been a private contractor. And he has a wealth of things that it's like, oh, I didn't know that. Skip firing, for instance. I was like, that's a thing? I was like, yeah, it's a thing. Let me explain it. It is interesting to me that he is such a good teacher that I can now speak with a fair amount of authority on some of these things.
Well, we loved it, especially like going back to critical though. Like one of the things I thought that was really great for us is as martial artists, and we just love the training scene. Like in any good action film, the best part is always the training scene. So of course we were just like completely enamored by it. And what year was Critical Space written in? I'm not really sure, but even like with exercise and science and things, like it evolves and changes. But I mean, it still holds up very, very like accurately, like
the core is there.
Things, because our little book club got like really nitpicky with it since we're all martial artists as well in there. So, and they're like, well, what do you think of this when you talked about this exercise? And I'm like, I love the ballet and the yoga integration, and of course,
are better than
crunches. Like that still holds true, and so we love the training scene. Like obviously,
I would be interested if at some point we ever do a revised edition, how that changes.
Right. Because very little in what we kind of talked out. But
I will say, interestingly, and especially like Oscar, if you've gone back and you've read Keeper, for instance, where answering machines play a pivotal.
I know. He's like my I told Mimi, I was like, the dude's pager's going off.
Yeah, exactly. They had pagers because that's and having a pager in a non-medical profession at that time was a big deal.
That's 1996.
I
think I saw.
I had a pager in 96.
So I mean, it was.
But yeah,
interestingly, I'm in. This is. I don't want people running out and being like, "Oh my God, this is going to happen." I'm talking very seriously to a producer about a Kodiak series. We don't know if it's going to happen. And if it does, we don't know where. But one of the things we've discussed is that they have to be done as period pieces. That you would do effectively, you'd set it up so that you'd effectively start with Critical Space. And then you would move through to Walking Dead. But, that's, depending on how far back you go, this is a 10-year story. Mm-hmm. So that in your first season, it is a period piece. It is set in, 2003.
Right.
And that, Patriot follows on that, into say 2005, but Walking Dead is 2011, or 2010, because you need so much of that world is contingent on the technology available at any given time, right? Elena's MO changes radically with burner phones, right? And we can't fudge her age too much because so much of her identity is as a last stage Cold War product. Right. She has to be of a certain age. She can't be much younger than that. Or else we're creating a whole new fiction.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And you could create that fiction, but it becomes very interesting, if they're 30-year-olds at the start and they're almost 50 at the end. That could be a really cool 3 or 4 seasons of a way to tell it. Mm-hmm.
Well, that was Brian and the Long Box's question. Why the hell is there not an Atticus Kodiak film franchise or HBO show? We love those books. So that answered 2 listener questions in one swoop.
For a while, there almost was a Kodiak show. Years ago, I worked with a woman named Greer Shepard, who has a very distinguished television resume. And we actually sold Kodiak to USA in the Room, like literally had the meeting, did the pitch, left the meeting, went to the airport to fly home, got a call from Greer saying they want it. And then about a week later, like before contracts had even started to move, the head of the network got fired and all of their people got removed, and a new head came in and immediately put bullets in everything that the last guy had been developing. So we were very, very close at one point. And it was an interesting take on the story. I think, when we talk about a Kodiak series, one of the things that, and I think the first 3 novels are strong novels in the main, but they also are, I was, 24. They also reek of me being a very young man.
Can I just say, for Keeper, right? I was telling Mimi, I said, all right, I was like, let me give you the recap on Keeper. First, it's abortion is the main theme.
Yep. No,
Second,
I wrote that book entirely because I was trying to figure out how people who venerated life so much could justify murdering doctors who were providing a legal service.
And then a young girl with Down syndrome gets murdered.
Yep.
And then he loses his best friend at the end. I was like, this. So it just seems, to me, it was great. I was like, wow, this is.
It starts.
Oscar likes the darkness.
It starts really dark. Well, then you're going to love Finder.
Yeah.
Okay, so now he's going to keep going for sure. Because at first he's like, I need some backstory.
Because Finder, like, Keeper ends down, Finder dives, and then Smoker starts to pull out.
Right. Well, it's the three arc thing. So the middle
and then
one
you
has
get
to be
exactly, and then you get shooting. Then you get Shooting at Midnight, which is, and Shooting at Midnight. We are not even talking about the books we ask people to read.
Yeah.
Shooting at Midnight was a direct response to Smoker, because the first novel is the first novel, right? You write it, you have all the time in the world to write it, you give it to the editor, they give it back, you work on it, they publish it. It's your first book, you did it. Then they want the second one, and you've got to do it again. And that is a whole other thing. And Finder got rewritten top to bottom 4 times.
Ooh.
Like 4 times. Wow. And when you read Finder, just bear this in mind, Oscar, the SAS do not enter that story until the 3rd draft of it.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
This is where more comes in?
Yeah. Right. They do not show up until I am that far in. And then what happened with Smoker wrote like a dream. Like, I wrote it, I sent it to my editor. This was before you were submitting electronically. I sent her the manuscript. I got the manuscript back with her editorial letter basically saying, I think you need to address this thing. I was like, oh, I know how to do that. I wrote a chapter in an afternoon. I sent it back and we were done.
Wow.
And I was terrified. Because I was like, oh my God, either this sucks, and it may, or I have figured it out, like I've figured out the recipe, and that's bad too. So the next thing I did was go, okay, well, how do you shake it up? And you shake it up by writing the next one from Bridget's POV. Mm-hmm. And that's going to require a radical change in every way you approach the novel. So you have Smoker, and then you get Shooting, which is also referenced in Critical, right. And then you enter Critical, and then you're in the last cycle there. So
yeah, and so that kind of answers one of our other listener questions. Ian was asking how long it kind of takes you to write a novel. So they are all very different animals, but generally speaking, is it like a 1-year process or?
So that's a really, really hard question for me to answer. And the reason for that is It depends on where you mark the start of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you say the start of the process is when I open whatever I'm going to be writing the novel in, be it Word or Scrivener or Pages or whatnot, and I write the words chapter 1 or prologue or whatnot, and I start typing, it can be anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, because when I am writing a novel, I'm writing at about 3,000 words a day. Like, the goal is to hit 3,000 words a day. So the first couple days will be a ramp up.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that point on, like, once the dust is off and I feel like I have my muscles back, I can hit 3,000 words a day pretty regularly, and sometimes go as high as 5,000. So 3,000 words a day, is 18,000 words a week. 18,000 words a week in 5 weeks is 90,000 words. Your average novel is 80 to 120,000. Okay? And 120,000 words is on the long side. So, depending on how things are going, I can do the typing part, getting the draft out, and it is a draft, right? So the goal is just get it out.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why I can do 3,000 to 5,000 words a day. It's just like, and trying, and I've done it enough that I can hear, the little voice in my head when I'm stepping really wrong, and I will have had, so and then after that, I tend to be revising as I go.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things that will happen in process is that at the end of each day, I will print, and I will then read either the same day or the next morning. And sometimes, if Jen has got the time, I'll read it aloud, which becomes editing. And then I'll go back down to the office and I'll input all those edits, and that will get me right back into the swing, right?
Mm-hmm. So
that the difference between the first draft and the second draft at that point isn't copy, edit, or prose. It becomes far more, it's far more material evolution. But that said, I've already said that there's this Kodiak novel, like the tentative title is Whisper, right? And, I've been thinking about Whisper for 12 to 18 months. So, and I haven't written it yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So is the answer going to be, 5 years? Or is the answer, it is.
Yeah, it varies. But I think they just meant like, once you sit down and put pen to paper, quote unquote.
Yeah, right? I'm fast, and I'm not, and if you read my stuff, it doesn't require, I don't go running to the thesaurus a lot. In these genres in particular, I tend to write very more Hemingway, less Faulkner, shall we say. Yeah. And I believe that serves, and that's a good style for me. My style is influenced by Hemingway, Chandler, and Douglas Adams. Yeah. What a mess, So
okay, and you mentioned that you thought, for you personally, that Walking Dead you feel is your strongest, but they want to know what your favorite Kodiak book is. So is that also your favorite?
That's hard. Favorite, maybe it's a toss up between Critical and Walking.
Okay. Okay, fair enough.
This sort of begs the unanswered question about what's the deal with Patriot Acts. and the deal
Oscar had a couple notes on that too.
Yeah, fire away. Maybe that's how we get into it.
Well, this is, I have to give credit to listening to you guys for, is it 23 times?
Oh, God.
well, when
Oscar, no.
There's a term like what is it? Reticular activation system. When something's at the top of mind, you pick things out. So while reading Patriot Acts, I don't know if I would have noticed this just without all of the background of you two having this relationship, right? So there's a part in the book where that Agent Bowles says, "Are you a patriot? Do you don't you love your country? And it just comes out, your voice is like, that's a stupid question. It's a
I hate that question. It's a question used to do the us or them.
Yeah.
Can you tell that book was written during the second Bush administration?
And even like you ended, I'm not going to read the whole quote. It's a really good, I copied it, and I like the end. It just said, where you put, it was a question that for the first time it had ever been uttered outside the Garden of Eden was a justification for violence. Cain, I was sure, asked Abel if he loved his country. I was like, that's good shit. So I like, and I say that because I don't know if I would have picked that up without the background of you two doing this podcast for so long, where I was like, wow, that is...
Well, like Greg's in my head. I told you, whenever I read anything now, Greg's in my head. I can't,
I can't
read it without the
just
context.
hit me. And I had to like stop and write it down.
Yeah, Oscar's a good
and
book
thought
reader.
about it, and I was like, that was good. And I was like, that's basically, I don't know if I'm wrong. I was like, this is the theme of his whole book.
No,
well, also
that's why it's called Patriot
Act.
Yeah. Right?
Because the Patriot Act had recently been passed. Right. And I want I like titles that you can have a little, that you can do a little work with. And I thought the act was kind of crucial, right? And I will say there is a sequence in that novel that I love. It's the Montana sequence.
The hotel.
Oh
no, when he's
in the
getting
cabin?
Yeah, it's through the hotel, but it's literally when he calls them out, when he bird dogs them out to him. And Elena's out in the woods.
It's a great scene too.
And Elena's out in the woods being terrifying.
Yeah.
Like literally being terrifying. That these guys just have no idea. And that moment when Atticus is in the snow and the gun is pointing, he's like, do not do that. You do not want to do. She's going to kill you for that one.
Yes.
I am trying to keep you alive. And, she wasn't going to risk it. And one of the things I do like about Patriot Act, and I don't think the novel is a failure. I think it's two different novels, and I can never look at it objectively because the inciting incident is one that I do not like. I got into publishing very young, and despite what people may think of my personality, I gave an incredible amount of deference to my editor. And when she would come to me and say, well, you should consider doing this, or you need to do this or whatnot, they were the bosses. I was working for them. And as a result, I did not stick to my guns. And on Patriot Acts, she was adamant that I had to kill Natalie at the top.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's my least favorite because, first of all, Natalie, in like the first 5 minutes, it felt like, because I do audio, I'm like, what?
Yeah. I will tell you right now, we do a series. I'm not getting rid of Natalie.
Yeah.
It was the worst mistake I ever made in that series, in my opinion. There were other ways to activate that plot and to personalize it. But frankly, it was kind of going back to the same well again. It was yet again, somebody close to him has suffered. That was editorial. And well, what builds out as a result, is, I think, a very viable novel. Mm-hmm. And sort of the crucial, in talking about that changing of the worlds, it is the transition novel. It's the full transition. It is also, yeah, I mean, it makes it really hard for me to go back and revisit. And I reread all three of these not too long ago in preparation of having the conversation. And there are things in that book that I think are quite strong. And in terms of the characters' arcs, it's vital. You know, Atticus and Elena in Georgia for a year and a half, you know. And I like the evolution of their romance. I like it starting in this place in critical space where I'm very fond of the dance sequence in the training.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when they have, because to me it was very honest that they had this moment and she says, have you thought about it? And it's the first time that she acknowledges herself as a sexual creature.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, Atticus is. He'll stick his dick in anything, right? I mean, Bridget is not wrong when she says, you know, a long pair of pretty legs comes up to you and bats her eyes and says, help me, Mr. Kodiak, help me. And you go all to pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, yeah, I do. And I hope you're counting yourself in that number.
Right.
And the response is, oh, yeah, I am, babe, but I never asked you to kill for me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Bridget has some legs to stand on. She's not wrong, which is one of the reasons why I like that tension, because they're all in a place where everybody's absolutely right to believe what they believe. You can't look at them and be like, yo, you're wrong. It's like, no, they're not wrong. She killed people. It's what she did for years. There is a real argument to say, no, that is not a life worth saving. All right. But I do like the fact that, you know, in critical, you know, that tension is evolving. It's there. And when Oxford makes his move, he's capitalizing on that presumption, right? I mean, that he is surprised when when was the last time you had sex? And Atticus is like, we've never had sex. And Oxford's like, oh, look, I know this is embarrassing, but tell me the truth.
Which, by the way, you gave me a mild heart attack during that whole like capture sequence. I was like, Greg wouldn't do me wrong, right? Like he would have given me a heads up.
No, I wouldn't.
I knew Atticus would get out of that.
Yeah. I'm like, how is he going to get out of this? Because I was like,
but Mimi, you need to bring up.
I do, because I know we're gonna run out of time. But my book club will kill me because
we can do this part 2 next week.
But besides Elena, Miyata is like the most beloved character, and we want to know why you picked the name Miyata, and also how you thought of this like very special character, this dog that doesn't have a voice.
Okay, this is a good one to end on. Okay. So back in the day, I used to, there's a mystery writers convention called Boucher Con. And I used to attend it. I was never very good at getting into the community. It was just, I'm very shy, and it was very awkward for me, and it was really hard. I was never good at socializing on that level, and there's a lot of politics under writing it. But early on, I would go and I would do these things, and there would be fundraisers. And one of the things that you would offer, you would auction off things like signed first editions. You know, one of the things you would auction off was a character. You could say, so I am auctioning off a character in the next Kodiak novel. Mm-hmm. And what that would mean was, say, if Oscar bid on it and won, he could come to me and he'd say, so I would love for you to include my wife in the next book. Here is her name. Here are some things about her. And, you know, just make her a badass and don't kill her. And, you know, I would be like, okay, right? It depends on how much is being raised. And sometimes it's like simply the name will be used. Sometimes you're saying it will be an actual character.
Yeah.
So I had said, well, I will auction off a character. right? It's going to be a secondary supporting character. And the woman, I cannot remember her name, who won the auction said, I want you to put my dog in. Her name is Miata. She's a Doberman. And I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, well, I don't even know how I do that. And I knew Elena had to have demonstrative empathy. If Elena had not had demonstrative empathy at the start of part 2, then Atticus is an idiot to agree. He has to see that not only is she afraid and not only is she sincere, but that she is not a monster. That she can, and here we're at the last moment, we're getting it in. There's a reason that there is no White House pet. Pet owners, by definition, have to have empathy.
Right.
Right. You have to be able to empathize to have a pet. There's no, the only other reason they're not pets, otherwise they're livestock, right? They're a commodity. Mm-hmm. But if they're your pet, then that is because there is a mutuality in the relationship. So Elena had to have a way that wasn't going to Atticus, see, look, I can love a thing, right? It had to be organic.
Right.
So she had to have a dog. And she had to have a dog that made sense. And I don't remember whose conversation if it had been a conversation or something I'd read, but it had been about drug houses in the Miami area, actually, that would be booby-trapped and dogged up, and they would mute the dogs. Mm-hmm. They would cut their throats. Wow. Or they would cut their vocal cords so that you couldn't hear them, but the other thing is it just drove them crazy. Yeah, I mean, taking a dog's voice is psychological torture. Mm-hmm. So the idea of Elena going into the situation and being forced to put down these animals along with all the bad guys, but here's this last one. And in that moment, and against all reason going, I'm going to save this dog. And then going to the nearest emergency veterinary clinic. And they say, well, what's your dog's name? And her going, Toyota. I mean, literally, it was the car right there. And one of the cool things that happened as a result of this is Miata. Like, Miata is wonderful and is so important and is so, I think, crucial to character, and never mind the fact that, is now responsible for saving Elena's life.
Yeah.
Arguably twice. I'm very fond of, and again, I'm very fond of that sequence where she's like, I am now going to do everything I can to save this dog.
Yeah, that was great.
And like I say, I mean, it's important that you see the Miata becomes an extension of Elena in a lot of ways. And I will say one of the sad things that I know about Whisper, if I write it, is that my Miata will have passed away. There's just no way. There's just no way.
That long.
Yeah, because Miata was already, an older dog.
Yeah, Miata's old by the time we hit Walking Dead.
But you didn't kill Miata in Walking Dead, so that was okay. Because Oscar was Miata's important. Something happens. I'm like, what? Tell me.
Yeah, that was Elena's no good, very bad day. Burned down my house.
Yeah.
You burned everything and you shot my dog.
Right.
So,
Well,
Oh,
even in
and-
Critical,
and I'm pregnant.
when Miata was like swimming in the, I was like freaking out. I was like,
Yeah, when Miata doesn't come and Atticus is like, I don't have a choice here. I got to go
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's such a beloved character that's like unexpected, So I think that is such a cool story, though. That's kind of how
That's how you
Miata
get a
came to
dog named Miata. Yeah.
I love it. I
Awesome.
love it. Okay, well, we do have more listener questions, so I will tag them onto a future conversation that you and I inevitably will be having.
I'm happy if you want to continue it next week. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. No, this is great because we're all in now, and now we can't wait for book 9. So.
Oh, wow. Don't hold your breath. You'll pass out.
At the very least, the series. So, however,
again, knocking on wood, we will see.
However, listeners can support that. You let us know. But listeners, keep sending your questions then, because we will continue to talk, and periodically I'm able to squeeze in listener questions whenever we talk anyway. So.
Right.
Always a pleasure. I love talking these books with
Oscar.
you.
Thank you for joining.
Oscar got to jump in with us today.
Hey, thank you for writing the books. I enjoyed myself.
I am glad. Thank you, sir.
All right. Until next time, everyone.
Yeah, take care.
Rucka.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.